The people who underestimate you often become the first witnesses to the truth. 17-year-old Jaden Brooks quietly remembered those words every Saturday morning as he reported to Whitmore Estate before sunrise. The magnificent property stretched across rolling green hills outside Charleston, South Carolina, where towering oak trees, elegant stone gardens, and a century-old mansion reflected generations of wealth and tradition. Jaden had worked there on weekends for nearly a year, helping the estate staff prepare banquet rooms, polish antique furniture, and welcome guests during special family gatherings. He took pride in every task because his grandmother had taught him that the quality of a person's work revealed the quality of that person's character. On this particular morning, the estate looked more formal than ever before. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway while members of the Whitmore family arrived from across the country dressed in tailored suits and elegant dresses. The family had gathered for the official reading of Eleanor Whitmore's estate documents, an event surrounded by quiet anticipation and careful conversation. Although Jaden knew nothing about inheritances or legal matters, he understood that today carried unusual importance. His supervisor assigned him to assist with refreshments inside the grand drawing room before the attorney arrived. Jaden carefully arranged crystal glasses, prepared silver serving trays, and made certain every chair sat perfectly aligned around the long mahogany table. As guests entered, he greeted each person politely with a warm smile. Most responded kindly, but a few barely noticed him. One middle-aged relative glanced briefly toward Jaden before quietly telling another family member, "Make sure the help stays near the wall once the meeting begins." Another guest looked toward the serving tray and added with an amused smile, "He is just the help. None of this concerns him." The comments were spoken casually rather than loudly, yet Jaden heard every word. He simply lowered his eyes for a moment before continuing his work with the same calm professionalism. Becoming angry would not improve the situation, and his grandfather had always reminded him that dignity never depends upon another person's opinion. Across the room, Eleanor Whitmore observed the exchange without saying anything. At 72 years old, the retired businesswoman had spent decades watching people reveal their true character through ordinary moments rather than dramatic speeches. She noticed that Jaden neither complained nor reacted with resentment. Instead, he quietly helped an elderly housekeeper carry a heavy arrangement of flowers before returning to organize the refreshments with careful attention. A faint smile crossed Eleanor's face. Soon the family attorney arrived carrying several leather document cases. Everyone gradually gathered around the large table, while estate employees stepped respectfully toward the edges of the room. Jaden prepared to leave after placing one final pitcher of water beside the attorney, but his supervisor asked him to remain nearby in case additional refreshments were needed. He nodded politely and stood quietly beside the fireplace, careful not to interrupt the meeting. The attorney opened the first document case and began arranging neatly labeled folders across the polished table. Routine estate matters came first, followed by charitable foundations and property records. Family members listened attentively, occasionally exchanging satisfied glances as familiar details were reviewed. Finally, the attorney reached into the last document case and paused unexpectedly. His expression changed as he discovered a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax and marked with precise handwritten instructions. He read the first line silently, frowned with genuine surprise, then slowly looked up from the page toward the far corner of the room where Jaden Brooks stood quietly, holding an empty silver tray. The attorney remained silent for several long seconds before carefully adjusting his glasses and reading the handwritten instruction once again to make certain he had not misunderstood it. Every member of the Whitmore family watched him with growing curiosity. Finally, he spoke in a calm, measured voice. "This sealed document contains a condition written personally by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. It states that the envelope may only be opened while Jaden Brooks is physically present inside this room." A wave of confusion spread around the mahogany table. Several relatives immediately turned toward the teenager standing quietly beside the fireplace. One guest frowned in disbelief, while another looked toward Eleanor as though expecting her to correct an obvious mistake. Instead, she simply folded her hands together and nodded. "The instruction is correct," she said peacefully. "Please continue exactly as it is written." The room became unusually quiet. Jaden looked toward his supervisor with uncertainty, believing he should probably leave rather than interrupt such an important family matter. His supervisor hesitated, unsure what to do, until Eleanor spoke again. Jaden, would you please come closer? Her voice carried kindness rather than authority. Jaden slowly placed the empty silver tray on a nearby side table before walking carefully toward the large conference table. Every pair of eyes followed him. Only minutes earlier, he had been treated as though he belonged outside the conversation. Now the attorney gently moved an empty chair away from the table to create space for him to stand beside the legal documents. One relative quietly whispered, "Why would his presence matter?" Another answered under his breath, "Perhaps this concerns one of the household employees." Eleanor heard the exchange, but offered no explanation. Her calm expression revealed only patience. The attorney carefully lifted the cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax and examined the signature across the back. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said respectfully, "the instruction also states that before this seal is broken, I must ask one question." Eleanor nodded. "Go ahead." The attorney turned toward Jaden. "Young man, would you please state your full legal name exactly as it appears on your birth certificate?" Jaden looked surprised by the request, but answered politely, "My name is Jaden Elijah Brooks." The attorney compared the answer against the writing on the envelope before giving a small nod. "It matches perfectly." Several members of the Whitmore family exchanged increasingly puzzled expressions. One of Eleanor's nephews leaned forward and asked, "Aunt Eleanor, have you known this young man longer than we realize?" Eleanor smiled gently without revealing anything. "I have known about him for many years," she replied. "Long before any of you ever noticed him working here." The answer only deepened everyone's curiosity. The attorney slowly reached for a polished letter opener resting beside the legal files. Just before cutting through the blue wax seal, another folded instruction slipped from beneath the envelope. He unfolded the note carefully and read it aloud. "Before opening the enclosed documents, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore must personally confirm that Jaden Brooks is the individual identified within these records." Without hesitation, Eleanor stood from her chair, walked until she stood directly beside Jaden, and looked at him with unmistakable warmth. Then she addressed the entire room with quiet certainty. "Yes," she said, "this is the young man I have been waiting for, and everything you believe about why he is standing in this house is about to change forever." No one in the drawing room spoke as the attorney carefully broke the dark blue wax seal and unfolded the first document resting inside the cream-colored envelope. Even the ticking of the antique grandfather clock seemed unusually loud in the silence. Jaden Brooks remained standing beside Eleanor Whitmore, uncertain why his name had suddenly become the center of a family gathering that had nothing to do with him. The attorney adjusted the pages in front of him before reading aloud. "This statement was written by Eleanor Whitmore and witnessed by my legal counsel 12 years ago. It is to remain confidential until Jaden Elijah Brooks is physically present inside Whitmore Estate after reaching the age of 17. Several relatives exchanged bewildered looks. One quietly counted the years in disbelief. Eleanor had prepared these instructions long before Jaden had ever worked at the estate. The attorney continued reading. "If you are hearing these words today, it means the young man standing before you has grown into exactly the person I hoped he would become." Eleanor lowered her eyes with quiet reflection as memories filled her thoughts. The attorney opened a second folder containing faded photographs, handwritten correspondence, and several official records preserved inside protective sleeves. He carefully placed the first photograph on the polished mahogany table so everyone could see it. The image showed a much younger Eleanor standing beside an African-American man, wearing simple work clothes, while both smiled outside the very same mansion decades earlier. Jaden stared at the photograph with growing curiosity. The man's face looked remarkably familiar. The attorney then lifted another document. "The gentleman shown in this photograph is Benjamin Brooks." Jaden's eyes widened immediately. "That was my grandfather," he whispered almost instinctively. Eleanor nodded gently. "Yes, it was." The room remained completely silent as she continued. "Most people believed Benjamin worked here only as a maintenance supervisor. Very few ever learned what he truly did for this family." The attorney unfolded another handwritten statement prepared by Eleanor years earlier. "During a financial crisis nearly 30 years ago, Benjamin Brooks discovered accounting records that exposed a serious error capable of destroying Whitmore Estate and the charitable foundation supporting hundreds of scholarships. He could have remained silent and watched everything collapse. Instead, he brought the records directly to Eleanor Whitmore without asking for recognition, compensation, or reward. Several family members slowly leaned forward, listening more carefully than before. The attorney continued. His honesty protected this estate, preserved its charitable mission, safeguarded every employee's livelihood, and allowed generations of students to continue receiving educational support. A quiet gasp spread through the room. One relative softly asked, "Why has no one ever heard this story?" Eleanor answered with gentle honesty, "Because Benjamin insisted that no public announcement should ever be made. He believed doing the right thing lost its meaning if it was done for applause." She looked toward Jaden with unmistakable warmth. Years later, after Benjamin passed away, I quietly learned he had a grandson. I promised myself that one day, if that young man demonstrated the same integrity, his family's forgotten legacy would finally be restored. Jaden struggled to find words as he looked once more at the photograph of his grandfather standing proudly beside the woman, now revealing a history that had remained hidden for decades. The attorney then reached toward one final sealed packet resting beneath the photographs and paused before quietly saying, "Mrs. Whitmore, according to these instructions, the next document contains the reason Jaden Brooks was always meant to stand in this room today." The attorney carefully lifted the final sealed packet from the bottom of the cream-colored envelope and rested it on the polished mahogany table. Unlike the previous documents, this one carried Eleanor Whitmore's handwritten signature across the front beside a single sentence written in blue ink. To be opened only after Benjamin Brooks has been properly honored before his grandson. The attorney glanced toward Eleanor, who answered with a quiet nod. The seal was gently broken, revealing several neatly folded pages along with a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. Every member of the Whitmore family leaned forward, eager to understand why a simple key had been preserved alongside the estate papers for so many years. The attorney began reading aloud. "Benjamin Brooks accepted no reward for the honesty that preserved our family, our employees, and our charitable work. He believed that protecting another person's future was simply the right thing to do. Although he refused recognition during his lifetime, I cannot allow his family's contribution to disappear with history." Eleanor quietly looked toward Jaden before the attorney continued. "This key opens a private archive room inside Whitmore Estate. That room contains journals, correspondence, photographs, financial records, and personal letters documenting the events Benjamin Brooks helped overcome. Those records belong not only to the Whitmore family, but also to the Brooks family, because history should always belong to everyone who helped create it." Silence filled the drawing room once again. Several relatives slowly lowered their eyes, realizing that the teenager they had casually dismissed only minutes earlier was connected to one of the most important chapters in the family's history. One of Eleanor's nephews quietly stood from his chair and spoke with visible embarrassment. "Jaden, I owe you an apology. Before this meeting began, I judged you only by the work you were doing. I never stopped to wonder who you were." Another family member nodded in agreement. "We should have shown you the same respect we expected from everyone else." Jaden accepted their words with calm humility. "Thank you," he replied softly. "My grandfather always said respect means the most when people choose it after learning the truth, not because they are forced to offer it." Eleanor smiled with quiet pride. The attorney carefully placed the brass key into Jaden's hand. "Mrs. Whitmore instructed that this key must never be given to anyone else," he explained. "She believed only Benjamin Brooks' direct descendant should unlock what has remained protected for decades." Jaden gently examined the worn leather tag hanging from the key. On its reverse side, he noticed small handwritten words faded by time. They simply read, "Character is the only inheritance that grows stronger when shared." Eleanor's eyes filled with warm remembrance. "Benjamin wrote those words himself," she said. "I have carried that key for years because I promised him his family would receive it when the right moment arrived." The room remained completely still as Eleanor slowly rose from her chair. Looking toward Jaden with unmistakable trust, she extended her hand and quietly said, "Come with me." Behind one locked door is the complete story your grandfather chose never to tell, and before this day ends, every member of this family will finally understand why your place in this house was never beside the wall, but beside our history itself. Margaret Whitmore led Jaden Brooks through a quiet hallway hidden behind the formal drawing room, carrying the small brass key that had rested in her family records for decades before placing it back into his hands. Members of the Whitmore family followed several steps behind, no longer walking with confidence, but with respectful silence. They eventually stopped before a heavy oak door reinforced with antique iron hardware. Above the doorway hung a simple bronze plaque engraved with the words, "Private Family Archive." Eleanor smiled gently at Jaden. "Your grandfather once told me this room protected more than records," she said softly. "He believed it protected promises." She nodded toward the old lock. "Please open it." Jaden hesitated for only a moment before carefully inserting the brass key into the lock. With a slow turn, the mechanism released after many years of waiting. The wooden door opened to reveal a beautifully preserved archive illuminated by warm lighting. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held leather journals, estate ledgers, handwritten correspondence, framed photographs, newspaper clippings, and carefully organized financial records stretching back generations. Everything had been preserved with extraordinary care. Eleanor guided Jaden toward a long walnut table where a wooden presentation box rested beneath protective glass. She gently lifted the cover and revealed Benjamin Brooks' personal journal beside several original letters exchanged between Benjamin and the Whitmore family. Jaden carefully opened the journal and immediately recognized his grandfather's handwriting. The first page contained a simple sentence: "Integrity is remembered longest by those who needed it most." His eyes filled with emotion as he slowly turned each page. Benjamin had documented the difficult weeks during which he quietly uncovered accounting mistakes that threatened the estate and its charitable foundation. Rather than allowing innocent employees and scholarship recipients to suffer, he privately brought every record directly to Eleanor without asking for payment, recognition, or public praise. Eleanor quietly added, "Your grandfather refused every financial reward I offered him. He only asked me to continue supporting students and families who depended upon this foundation." She then removed another folder containing photographs from the years following the crisis. Many showed Benjamin working beside the Whitmore staff, restoring buildings, mentoring younger employees, and helping preserve the estate. One photograph showed Eleanor shaking Benjamin's hand beneath the large oak tree standing outside the mansion today. Attached beneath it rested a handwritten promise signed by Eleanor herself. It read, "If I am ever blessed with the opportunity, I will make certain the Brooks family receives the honor that Benjamin never accepted for himself." The Whitmore relatives quietly read the document together. Their expressions reflected humility rather than surprise. One family member softly admitted, "We inherited this estate because of wealth, but Benjamin protected it because of character." Eleanor nodded with quiet agreement before reaching into the presentation box one final time. She removed a sealed leather folder marked with Jaden's full name. "I prepared this many years ago," she explained. "I hoped that one day I would meet Benjamin's grandson and discover whether his greatest inheritance had been passed forward." She placed the folder into Jaden's hands with unmistakable trust. "Everything inside belongs to you now, but before you open it, there is something every member of this family needs to hear, because the greatest part of your grandfather's legacy has never appeared inside any journal, photograph, or estate record." Jaden Brooks looked down at the sealed leather folder resting in his hands before carefully opening its brass clasp. Inside were several neatly organized documents, a handwritten letter, and an official certificate bearing Eleanor Whitmore's signature. The room remained completely silent as he slowly unfolded the first page. Before he could begin reading, Eleanor gently placed her hand on the edge of the document. "Allow me," she said softly. These words were written for this moment. Jaden nodded respectfully and handed the letter back to her. Eleanor looked around the archive at every member of the Whitmore family before beginning to read. "If this letter is being opened, it means Benjamin Brooks' grandson has earned my complete confidence not because of his family name, but because of his own character. I wanted to know whether integrity could truly pass from one generation to the next. Over the past several years, I quietly watched Jaden work on this estate. I observed how he treated employees, visitors, gardeners, housekeepers, and guests. I noticed that he arrived early, completed every responsibility with care, and never complained when others overlooked him. Most importantly, I saw him help people even when no one was watching. In those moments, I recognized Benjamin's spirit living once again. Several relatives lowered their eyes with quiet reflection. Eleanor continued reading. Many people believe wealth is the greatest inheritance a family can receive. Benjamin taught me otherwise. He showed me that character protects wealth, but wealth alone can never create character. That lesson became the most valuable inheritance my family ever received. She folded the letter and looked directly at Jaden. Everything written here is true. Jaden stood speechless, overwhelmed by the realization that someone had believed in him long before he understood why. Eleanor then lifted the official certificate from the folder. Across the top appeared the words, Brooks Legacy Fellowship Charter. Beneath it, the document formally established an educational foundation supporting young people who demonstrated honesty, perseverance, community service, and academic dedication regardless of financial circumstances. Eleanor smiled warmly. Benjamin asked for nothing except opportunities for future generations. This fellowship fulfills the promise I made to him many years ago. The attorney quietly confirmed that the charter had already been legally approved and fully funded through Eleanor's estate. One of the younger Whitmore relatives looked toward Jaden with genuine admiration. You are not receiving this because of inheritance, she said softly. You inspired it by becoming exactly the kind of person your grandfather hoped you would become. Jaden answered with quiet humility. If my grandfather were standing here today, he would tell all of us that this fellowship belongs to every student willing to choose integrity when no one else is paying attention. Eleanor smiled proudly. That is precisely why I know Benjamin would approve. She then invited everyone back toward the drawing room where the remaining estate proceedings would continue. Before leaving the archive, Jaden paused beside the shelves filled with journals and family records. He realized those documents preserved far more than names and dates. They preserved choices that had quietly shaped countless lives across generations. As he gently closed the archive door behind them, Eleanor turned toward the family and said, There is one final announcement remaining in my estate documents, and it explains why Jaden's role in our family's future is only just beginning. Everyone returned to the grand drawing room, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The same people who had earlier viewed Jaden Brooks as nothing more than a weekend employee now stepped aside respectfully as he entered beside Eleanor Whitmore. The empty chair that had remained untouched throughout the meeting was quietly moved closer to the head of the table. Eleanor looked toward Jaden with a reassuring smile. Please sit here, she said gently. You have spent enough of your life standing at the edge of rooms where you belonged. Jaden hesitated before accepting the invitation with quiet gratitude. The attorney reopened the estate documents and located the final section prepared by Eleanor. He adjusted the pages before reading aloud. The following declaration concerns the future stewardship of the Brooks Legacy Fellowship and the educational mission supported by Whitmore Estate. Every family member listened carefully. The attorney continued. Upon my retirement from active leadership, I appoint Jaden Brooks as the founding student ambassador of the Brooks Legacy Fellowship. He will work alongside the Whitmore Foundation to encourage integrity, historical preservation, community service, and educational opportunity for future generations. A quiet murmur spread through the room, but this time it carried admiration rather than confusion. Eleanor looked around the table before speaking in her own words. This appointment is not about wealth. It is not about inheritance. It is about trust. Benjamin Brooks protected this family without asking what he might receive. His grandson has demonstrated that same spirit through his own choices. Character should always be recognized wherever it appears. Several relatives nodded thoughtfully. One of Eleanor's nieces slowly stood and walked toward Jaden. Earlier that morning, she had been among those who casually referred to him as just another member of the household staff. She extended her hand with sincere humility. Jaden, I cannot change the words I spoke today, but I hope I can change what I choose to say from this day forward. I judged you before learning your story. I am truly sorry. Jaden accepted her handshake with a warm smile. Thank you, he replied. My grandfather always believed people should be remembered for how they grow after making mistakes, not simply for the mistakes themselves. His answer seemed to lift a quiet burden from everyone present. One by one, other family members offered their own apologies and words of respect. None of them were prompted by Eleanor. They simply understood that honesty deserved an honest response. The attorney then presented Jaden with the official fellowship charter and invited him to sign the ceremonial acceptance page. Jaden carefully wrote his name beneath Eleanor's signature, completing a promise that had begun decades earlier with his grandfather's quiet act of integrity. Soft applause filled the drawing room. Eleanor's eyes reflected both relief and joy. She realized that the greatest purpose of her estate had never been the distribution of property. It had always been the restoration of gratitude. As the legal proceedings came to a close, the attorney reached into the final document case and removed one last envelope that had not yet been mentioned. Looking toward Eleanor with respectful surprise, he quietly said, "There is one final personal instruction addressed only to the entire Whitmore family, and I believe these words may become the most important legacy you leave behind." The attorney carefully unfolded the final personal letter and looked toward Eleanor Whitmore before beginning to read. His voice became softer than at any other point during the afternoon. "To my family, if you are hearing these words, remember that every dollar recorded inside these estate papers was built upon something far more valuable than wealth. Long before success, our family survived because another family chose honesty over opportunity. Never allow yourselves to remember the fortune while forgetting the character that protected it." The drawing room remained perfectly still. Every member of the Whitmore family listened with complete attention. Eleanor quietly continued the letter herself. "For years I worried that future generations might inherit comfortable lives without understanding the responsibility that accompanies privilege. Benjamin Brooks showed me that true leadership begins with humility, gratitude, and respect for every individual regardless of title, occupation, or circumstance. If our family ever forgets those lessons, then every material inheritance I leave behind will have failed its purpose." She gently folded the letter before looking around the room. Several relatives appeared deeply moved by her words. One of her grandsons slowly stood and spoke with quiet sincerity. "Grandmother, today has changed the way I understand our family history. We spent years celebrating our achievements without realizing another family helped preserve everything we inherited." Eleanor smiled kindly. History becomes complete only when every contributor is remembered. She then invited everyone to step outside onto the wide stone terrace overlooking the centuries-old oak trees surrounding Whitmore Estate. Beneath the largest tree stood a newly restored bronze bench that had remained covered throughout the gathering. Eleanor carefully removed the protective cloth. A polished bronze plaque became visible. It read, "In grateful memory of Benjamin Brooks, whose integrity protected generations yet unborn. May all who rest here remember that character is the greatest inheritance any family can leave behind." Jaden quietly read every word without speaking. Eleanor turned toward him. "I wanted your grandfather's name placed where every generation of this family gathers, not hidden inside an archive where only historians would discover it." Members of the Whitmore family gathered around the memorial with genuine respect. Several quietly thanked Jaden for allowing them to learn the truth about Benjamin's life. Jaden responded with the same humility he had shown throughout the day. "My grandfather believed gratitude should always move forward. The greatest way to honor him is not by talking about the past forever, but by treating people with greater kindness tomorrow." Eleanor nodded proudly. That is exactly the future Benjamin hoped to inspire. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the estate grounds, the attorney approached Eleanor with one final document requiring only her signature. Once completed, the Brooks Legacy Fellowship officially became active. Beginning the following school year, students from every background would receive opportunities made possible by a promise first inspired decades earlier through one quiet act of honesty. Watching Jaden standing beneath the old oak tree, Eleanor realized that her estate had accomplished something no financial document alone could ever achieve. It had reunited two families through truth, restored forgotten gratitude, and transformed an overlooked teenager into the living guardian of a legacy that would continue inspiring generations long after every signature on the estate papers had faded into history. 1 year later, Whitmore Estate welcomed students, educators, community leaders, and families from across the country for the first annual Brooks Legacy Fellowship celebration. The Grand Mansion no longer represented only generations of wealth. It had become a place where integrity, service, and gratitude were honored above status or inheritance. Banners celebrating educational opportunity lined the entrance, while scholarship recipients eagerly gathered beneath the towering oak trees that had witnessed so much history. Jaden Brooks arrived early that morning carrying the same quiet confidence he had shown on the day everything changed. Although he now served as the founding student ambassador of the Brooks Legacy Fellowship, he greeted every visitor exactly as he once had when he worked weekend shifts at the estate. He welcomed guests with genuine warmth, thanked volunteers personally, helped elderly visitors find their seats, and spoke with every student who appeared nervous about meeting new people. Eleanor Whitmore watched from the front porch with quiet satisfaction. Recognition had opened new doors for Jaden, but it had never changed his character. That truth meant more to her than every signature contained within her estate papers. As the ceremony began, Eleanor stepped onto the outdoor stage overlooking the restored gardens. Behind her stood a beautifully crafted memorial display featuring Benjamin Brooks' photograph beside the words, "Integrity creates legacies that time cannot erase." She welcomed the audience before inviting Jaden to stand beside her. Warm applause filled the estate grounds as scholarship recipients smiled with admiration. Eleanor addressed the gathering with calm conviction. Many people believe family legacies begin with wealth. I learned that true legacies begin with choices. One honest decision made decades ago continues creating opportunities for young people today. That is the inheritance we celebrate. She then invited Jaden to speak. Looking across the audience, he noticed students from many different backgrounds, each carrying dreams of building a better future. He smiled gently before speaking. "My grandfather taught me that respect should never depend upon someone's occupation, appearance, or circumstances. Every person carries a story that deserves to be heard before it is judged. If this fellowship accomplishes anything, I hope it reminds every student that character grows stronger each time we choose honesty, kindness, and responsibility." The audience responded with heartfelt applause. Many parents quietly thanked Eleanor for preserving Benjamin Brooks' story, while students gathered around the fellowship exhibit to read the journals, photographs, and letters that had finally become part of the estate's permanent historical collection. Later that afternoon, Eleanor and Jaden walked together beneath the great oak tree where Benjamin's memorial bench overlooked the estate. They paused for a quiet moment before Eleanor smiled warmly. "Your grandfather protected our family's future," she said softly. "You protected his memory. Because of both of you, two families will forever be connected by gratitude instead of circumstance." Jaden looked toward the students laughing together across the lawn and quietly replied, "The greatest inheritance was never hidden inside the estate papers. It was hidden inside the example one good person leaves for everyone else." Eleanor nodded with peaceful agreement as the afternoon sunlight settled across Whitmore Estate, knowing that long after every document had been archived and every signature had faded with time, the legacy of Benjamin Brooks would continue living through every life inspired to choose character before recognition, kindness before privilege, and truth before personal gain.